Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds Edge to Edge Transformation. When we are going edge to edge, we need to find our center. And that's why I rely on my friends like Dr. Cynthia Phelps. Cynthia, you've been doing all kinds of interesting things and helping people find some sort of a center.
There was a couple points in my life that I can talk about that were really quite pivotal. The first one was it was about 2002 to 2004. I really went through this period of great loss in my life. I was getting a divorce and we owned a business together and we had a stepchild together. All the debt was in my name, and my girlfriend was then his next wife. On so many levels of my life, there was grief and loss. I was 35 at the time, and I had managed to make it to age 35 with only intellectual tools in my life. Like you say, from here to here. That's the way that I was living my life. And that didn't work for where I was in my life. And what I was doing was I was misusing alcohol as a way to try to calm my nerves and to just reset my nervous system. As you imagine, it can work for a while, but sometimes it just stops working and it starts making things a heck of a lot worse. Every time I would drink alcohol, I had so much anxiety and depression. I was in this stuck place where I was harming myself and I didn't know how to get out of it. One of the things that happened to me was I was reading a magazine article about a researcher named Kristin Neff and her research on self-compassion. So my background was in, some people call the hard sciences. I was in medical science, human medicine, pharmacology, neuroscience. I didn't really have a whole lot of exposure to things like the social sciences and psychology. When I read about her research in self-compassion, like it blew my mind. And in fact, it was like one of those moments in your life where you can remember exactly where you were sitting. And it was like the clouds parted and like this ray of sunshine came down and was like, this is what's going to fix your life. And it was this moment of clarity that was so powerful for me. And then just like on the heels of that, as I was reading more about what self-compassion really was and not just the wonderful outcomes, I realized I had none of it. Like this was a huge deficit for me. So I got to work and started really learning about self-compassion. Because I was an academic, I think I actually held myself back a bit because I studied it here for about 3 months before I realized, like, oh, I need to do these practices to be able to be more self-compassionate to myself. So I always thought that's kind of a funny story that it was another revelation that I actually had to practice this thing. I couldn't just learn it and then have my life be better. I was off to the races. It didn't take me very long. I set a date to quit drinking, and that was 10 years ago now. I started training in self compassion and I took Dr. Neff's actual teacher training course. I remember sitting in the back of the class. It was towards the end of my training, and I kind of thought I knew it all. I had read every single one of her research articles. Her first book had come out, and I read her whole book. I thought I had it going on. And I'm sitting in the back of the teacher training, just kind of kicked back, like, okay, let's get this over with. I'm ready to teach people self compassion. And she started telling a story, and the story, incidentally, was in her book. I had read her story, but here she is telling the story live. It was about how she has an autistic son. And at the time, I think he was like 8 or somewhere in there. She was grocery shopping with him. He ended up having a meltdown in the grocery store where he was red faced and kicking and screaming. Just kids, right, will have problems like this. And As a parent of a child with autism, you can't intervene. You're likely to get kicked. You kind of have to ride it out. Here she is in this public space. People are looking at her like, what are you doing to your child? She stops in the middle of class and she puts her hand over her heart and she models her inner compassionate voice for us. And she says, "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry you're having to go through this. This is so hard." And again, I was like, what? You speak to yourself? Here I had spent a couple of years diligently studying self-compassion, and I didn't even realize I had this huge gap in my knowledge. My inner voice was very harsh, extremely judgmental, and even sometimes a bully. That was the exact moment that my company was born, in theory. The name of my company is Inner Ally, which is the inner friend. When Kristin spoke to herself in that kind and nurturing voice, what really came to mind for me was a character like the grandmother. That character of the sweet and nurturing grandmother really blossomed into like this whole cast of characters. Like, this is the explorer, and it's all about independence, and the outlaw about power, and the innocence of self acceptance, and the artist about emotional expression. That was the birth of the Inner Allies and the beginning, the seed of how I was going to teach people self-compassion.
Wow, that's such an exciting story. The Cynthia I've known has been always compassionate. Many of us forget that we have to care for ourselves. I find it interesting that inner ally is going to become inter ally soon. You're bringing it to the internet and using all these intelligent tools. Can you tell us a little bit about how technology is changing your work and transforming your work?
The core of this Inner Ally process is I have a questionnaire that I put people through. This questionnaire is a way to find people's core emotional needs. Core emotional needs has nothing to do with being needy. It just has to do with what are the things within ourselves that we most need to nurture in order to thrive. Sometimes I call them like your emotional superpowers, especially when I'm talking about the inner allies. Everybody has a little bit of a different profile of their core emotional needs. Those needs are kind of like a recipe for how to speak to yourself in a compassionate way. What I've done is I've created a system to help people create phrases that they say directly to themselves in the moments when they actually need them in life. One of the big times that people really use them is when your inner critic starts to get really mouthy and hold you back, or you have an inner bully that's calling you names. What I'm doing is not trying to tell people to squash those voices, because often those voices are built from fear. They're trying to protect us in some way. But what I'm doing is helping them build kind of the opposing language. And how I do that is we create these phrases and then we test them in two ways with the person I'm working with directly. We check in with the inner critic. We have to be able to say these inner phrases without the inner critic laughing at you or like acting up in some way. I think some people will be familiar with this. Often you see affirmations on the internet or everywhere on people's walls. I am rich or I am powerful. When we're having a great day, you can say, I am powerful, and your whole body's like, yes, we are. But then some days you wake up and you say, I am rich. And your inner critic goes, have you looked at your bank account? And starts making fun of you, right? This is a critical piece of the process. We have to work with the inner phrasing. The best you're going to get out of your inner critic is going to go like, okay, fine. I'll let it pass. And then the other two measures is, how is it in your body? As a person who lived from here to here for so very long, this is new set of skills for so many of us, which is like, how are we feeling in the present moment in our body? When we say our inner ally phrases, our inner compassionate talk to ourselves, we want to be paying attention to how our body is responding. There's two main ways that people are feeling that I've found after like a really good phrase. One is they either say like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that feels great." Or like it's like, "Okay, yes, I can do this." It's a very soothing or empowering type of a feeling. Once you've got the inner critic kind of pacified and you've got a good body feeling, then you have an inner phrase that's really going to work for you.
I see that you're doing some amazing work. I know people who have been in your sessions. I have been in your sessions. Can you tell us about the interactive work you've been doing every week and every
Sure.
quarter?
I am actually in Stanford's Applied Compassion Training Program this year. And as part of that, I started doing free Tuesday evening session on Zoom. Anybody is welcome. The first maybe 10 minutes or so is me talking about maybe a particular inner ally or a particular topic. And then we do about 10 to 15 minutes of a mindfulness practice in that same vein. And then we take the rest of the time to really share about our experience and do a little inquiry and really learn from each other how everyone else's practice goes. It's so helpful in normalizing to hear other people's experiences, especially in mindfulness practices, because it all happens on the inside of our head very quietly. It's great to share that piece in community.
I remember meeting you at Wisdom 2.0, and you led many interesting and exciting sessions about how all these things come together. With the explosion of technology all around us, many of us have gotten to have this face to face interaction now. Is it possible that even good systems like AI can be utilized to be a compassionate companion rather than an inner critic? That AI telling you this is not right, that's the way you should live.
When people ask me about that kind of question about technology, my answer is always that technology is a tool. Just like a pencil, you can write beautiful poetry with it, or you can stab the person next to you. It is a tool. It can do very good things and it can do things that are not so great. I really adore technology. I got into technology around 90. 5, 6, right in there, right when internet browsers became interesting and interactive. I've kind of been an early adopter of technologies for a while. I was faculty at the School of Health Information Science while we were riding that first wave of technology, Web 1.0 and then Web 2.0. I tend to really sit in the camp of let's check out every new technology that comes along and figure out how we can make the world a better place. With my own work, what I do with the inner ally process right now is I do individual coaching and I do also online courses with it. We were talking earlier, that does not scale very far. When I first saw the generative AI tools come out, I realized the potential for them to be able to replicate some of the things that I do with people one-on-one, which is this personalized customizing of this inner language. This whole year that I've spent in the Applied Compassion Training Program, I've been looking at how I can take my work, make it more methodological, more systems driven. Like, how do I teach a computer how to do what I'm doing? What I'm thinking about for my own work is how can I use a large language model? It may not be like a chat GPT plugin. Maybe it'll be taking one of the sounds like an oxymoron, but small large language models, actually training it as a unit where I have a little more control over it to do some of the same things that I do. That's going to be very promising. I'm already networking with various people, particularly a person at Washington University who has developed a large language model that helps people create more empathetic language. It's being used currently on a few of the mental health emergency text lines. It used to be just a phone number that you'd call. Now you can text for that kind of thing. The system basically comes up and says like, would you like to phrase it like this after you type your response into the person? It allows you to look at that response and choose whether you think you want to use that empathetic response or not. We know that technology can do this kind of stuff. We always used to think, like, how are we going to get computers to be empathetic? Well, it is here, it is coming.
I can't wait to get hold of your empathic GPT or compassionate GPT. I think it's about time.
I
And
know, right?
in addition to all the other stressors, if you look at people in mid career or early in their career, the rate at which technology is changing your work and changing our life can be stressful too. Do you have any suggestions or advice on how people can be more self compassionate when it comes to dealing with all these changes in technology? You and I are early adopters, but it's much harder for people when they have this barrage of huge technological changes. How should they approach it? And how can they benefit from it?
Yeah, it's such a timely question for you to ask. I don't think anyone has the answer 100%. In fact, we just started a podcast called the Tequanimity Podcast, which is literally bringing guests on and talking about the intersection between technology, mindfulness, and compassion. And this idea of tequanimity is like, how do we live in a world of technology but maintain this equanimity, this calmness and ability to function in a world that's just bent set on overwhelming us, right? With all of the advances. I don't have the full answer to that question, but having that question in our minds on a regular basis and using our own mindfulness skills really day to day, hour to hour. What is happening in my life? What am I doing with technology? How do I feel in my body when I do that? How do I feel after? Everybody is going to be a little bit different of what we really get good, positive reinforcement. And sometimes people like me, right, that I'm at risk for slipping into addiction. I have to do things like monitor my social media use and put some restraints on myself so that I can have equanimity in my life.
I really like that equanimity in the siliconomy. As we get more and more into technology, can we have equanimity? It's everywhere. Our clothes and our body is going to have chips.
That may be helpful, actually. Some of the tools that are already on the market are biofeedback tools where it is actually registering what's happening in our body. And for people like past Cynthia, who was very out of touch with her body, that would have been incredibly helpful. Back before I started doing any therapy, learning any tools, anything like that, I really was hard pressed to identify the emotions that I was experiencing. Having integrated tools with our body will have some benefit for us if they have that biofeedback piece incorporated. But it also just sounds very scary at the same time. The locus of control for all of this is really unknown.
Yeah, yeah. Big Brother is not only watching from a distance, but Big Brother could be all over us.
In our bodies, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's not far. I have friends, RF chips in their wrists.
Yeah, I was just interviewing an executive yesterday, and he was saying that it's going to be there. We'll have 5G and 6G. But that really brings up something amazing, that it is possible to use technology for our own good, to really take care of ourselves, to take care of people around us. And that's why I wanted to hear from you. What a wonderful way to catch up. It's been years since we met face to face. We can't just rely on technology. And to people out there, I'm always looking for your views to understand what's going on, the challenges and the opportunities that we are all going through, so that we can build a future together that's most meaningful to all of us. And Cynthia, again, what a wonderful project you've taken upon yourself. I can't wait to start using your system. We will share the link to your Zoom call so people can participate on a regular basis. I'm so grateful for the work you're doing.
I am at the point in my life where it is time to do the work that really matters in the world. I'm all in.